Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Free Thinkers podcast. I am your host, Mateo Vallejo, and our first guest today is Miss Wendy Ramos. She is the teacher of the English Independent Studies class at Weslaco East High School. In this class, we study a new, important topic every 6 weeks that may affect us as students. This podcast is meant to expand on the content created by other students. Okay, Ms. Ramos, do you think that your teaching format may have led to the unorthodox class that we are in today?
By teaching style, I think you probably mean the way that I run all my classes or the previous class that, the students have taken with me, that kind of thing?
Yes, because the general teaching style at not only Weslaco East, but in schools in America that I've seen throughout my life and throughout on TV and everything, the examples I've seen are teachers, they have their lesson plans, they teach their lesson plans, and that's sort of it. They just prepare the students for the tests and just leave it at that. And your teaching style is you do that, but you sort of integrate it with our lives. And then you also teach us about life lessons. You also, like last year in English 4 with the seniors, you made sure they got their essays done for college. And in my opinion, I see a trend towards not only teaching what you're supposed to teach, but also making sure that you're improving and building your students to get ready for life.
Yeah, well, if that's what you mean by my teaching style, I would agree with that. I think that the class that we're in now with the independent studies is gearing more toward student-centered learning. I think you can do a certain amount of that when you have content, when you have to teach English 4 AP, or when you have to teach, geometry. There's a certain amount of content. But in the independent studies class, we're able to remove the decision-making from the teacher, from the content, almost completely. And the students decide the content, and all I need to do is facilitate and help them see the relevance in their work and facilitate the end result of that product. So, I'm a student-centered teacher, I think, overall is my teaching philosophy, and I think the class just allows me to explore that and enhance that with students because of the open nature of the course.
Okay. Now, this is the first year that the English Independent Studies class has been practiced at Weslaco East High School.
Right.
What was the process of proposing the class and getting it ready for this year?
Well, it started because the district started offering English 1 at the 8th grade level. So what that meant was that some students took the initial high school English class when they were still in 8th grade, and then they finished the sequence of 4 English classes when they were juniors. So when that came up last year, we started talking about, we meaning the administration, the counselors, students, everybody who had a stake in it, started talking about, well, what's going to happen during senior year? How are we going to have students in a class where they're reading and they're writing and they're expanding their ability to prepare for college without something specific, since they're not going to be taking an English class? So we tried a couple of different ideas. I was trying to get them to make decisions about it, and finally the principal, Dr. Gamboa, just said to me, well, if there was going to be a class that was an elective for seniors to take, what would it be? Like a hypothetical English 5 class. Yeah. What would it be? What would be the components? And he asked me to write that up so that they could do a proposal for the class. So I wrote up a proposal. I didn't know that I was going to be teaching it, but I imagined myself teaching it when I know the students well enough to know, and I've been teaching senior English long enough to know what kind of things that it would be good for students to do during that year. And so I just wrote up a proposal that had the basic components of test prep, research, reading, writing, vocabulary practice, and scholarship and college application type practice or preparation. So I wrote that up and it was approved, and then Dr. Gamboa asked me would I teach it. So I just went ahead and did that.
And you also got to plan for a class for the students that you already had the previous year.
Right. Most of the students that I have this year in independent studies were students that I had in my dual enrollment and AP last year. Yeah. So when I was thinking about planning the class, I was trying to make goals that would answer a really specific question in my mind. I have students who come back and visit sometimes who are off at college or in their careers or whatever. And more recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, I've heard students say, ask them, how's it going at college? And they say, oh, well, good, but I wish I had known this. Or good, but I took a sequence of classes that I ended up not needing. Or good, but. And I got really tired of hearing students say, I wish I had known this. I wish I had known that. And so I feel like in some ways I'm trying to remedy that in the class by trying to anticipate what are the unknowns about the college experience and address those while students are still in high school.
Now you mentioned the goals like preparation for college and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that the goals that you had in your mind last year have been accomplished so far? And if not, what do you think is holding it back?
I think we're on the road to accomplishing it, but it's only February, so I feel like there's still a few more months to go. I won't really know that 100% until you all graduate and you start college next year, and I ask you, so did the things that we did in that class enhance your ability to be a good freshman in college, or did it help you in some way? So I think that ultimately that direction will come from you guys.
Right.
But I feel like the goals that, from my perspective, that I set out are being accomplished. We're doing research. We're not just researching things and keeping them here. We're doing an outreach where we're trying to keep things on the website and the YouTube channel and trying to magnify our voice outward and help other students who might not have the class or might be in other places in the country think about some of these aspects of college. So that goal, I think we're on the way to accomplishing.
Now, have you found any complications that you didn't anticipate in teaching this class?
Yes, I think that the first year that you do anything like this endeavor, you're going to run into things that you didn't anticipate. One of them is that I didn't anticipate that some students sort of might not know what they were getting into, that it was going to be a serious class where there were deadlines and expectations, because the course is set up kind of as a work period. So sometimes we're watching a video on a topic as a class, but for the most part, it's set up so that there's a different focus each day in terms of our ongoing assignments and our ongoing activities and research. So I think maybe one complication is that not everybody knew that or understood the expectations of the projects before they took the class. I try to make those things clear when they're in the class, but when they were signing up for the class, I'm not sure everybody knew that we would be doing, some pretty hefty research and that the products would need to be professionally accomplished so that we could put them on YouTube and we could put them on the website. So I feel like maybe it was a little more work than people anticipated. So that was one complication. The other complication is that I didn't anticipate that we would need a little more direction in class time. Like I just sort of, and it's my fault, I made the assumption that everybody would know that if we have a work period that we would be working on one of the 4 or 5 things that are going on in class in our own research. And so what happened was I think some people got off track, or some people had trouble compartmentalizing how the time needed to be divided, like time management.
Now, this classroom is very different from a traditional classroom in the sense that students have more freedom to choose what they want to research and what they want to write about.
Right.
Now, what contribution do you think that gives to student education?
Well, every decision that I make is an eye toward, the future, but it's kind of hard, the future for students, and it's kind of hard to really quantify that in detail because everybody's going in a different direction. There's some people who might go into the military, other people will have different fields of study when they get to college and different future jobs. So I've been trying to keep things focused on an academic future without being specific about what that academic future is. So students have that freedom, and I think that in college work, there are those sorts of academic responsibilities. You're going to have to learn to set up your time. You're going to have to learn to realize that the project is going to require this amount of effort or this many hours of preparation. And all those skills we're practicing. So I feel like that's going to help in the future. I think also real world implications. The idea is that most people are researching topics that they really need to know about. They really need to know, how are you going to handle healthcare when you're off at, the University of Texas? What if you get sick? They really need to know things like how to compare the degree plans for their field between two different possibilities or two different options. So those things I think are kind of real world. We're also not doing research papers specifically, because research papers come into the teacher and I don't really need this information. The students need the information. So we're trying to conduct our research in a way where there's a video, there's something, a podcast, there's something that's going outward so that other students can gain from the information, instead of the traditional way that we do research in schools is write it up in a report, MLA format, turn it into your teacher, the teacher grades it and gives it back. There's nothing wrong with that, and you do plenty of that in college, but I feel like we've practiced that enough so far in high school. What we need to do is look at research and then find varied ways to represent our learning.
One of my favorite things about this class is the freedom that we have to research what we want in terms of education and in terms of things that are going to help us in life. Because I know last year when you explained it to us, like the general concept, I was excited because there's a lot of things I want to know about and a lot of things I want to learn, and I may either not be motivated enough to research them on my own time, or I may not just have the time to do it.
Right.
Because if we didn't have this class, I'd probably be in an AP class and just getting more homework on that.
Right.
And I might have like maybe a couple hours on the weekend or even a whole day, but I'm also going to need time to rest and all that. So the fact, not that I'm being forced to research these things, but the fact that I know it's for a grade and I'm eventually going to get it done.
There's a timeline, and
it makes me feel comfortable that I'm going to learn the things that I'm interested in, and I'm going to learn the things that I need to know later on in life.
Yeah.
Especially for the college essays that we did first semester. I was very excited last year when you talked to us about the class, because I knew, I know that's going to get done. And I wasn't nervous at all about whether I'm going to get it done or not, or whether I'm going to procrastinate.
Because I literally gave a grade for finishing those,
So we talk about a lot of topics in this classroom. We talked about dealing with stress. We talked about education and how it can be improved. Now, are there any topics that you wish to teach in this class, but you don't feel that you're gonna be able to due to time or anything?
I don't think so. The second semester is structured differently so that there are teams that are dealing with a variety of different topics that are helpful to them, and basically those are what we need to know about our future type topics, like how to manage distractions, affective needs for emotional issues, academic concerns, adulting, all those different topics. We have teams that are on those topics now. So I feel like that's a pretty broad list of team topics that individual groups are working on projects about, and then subtopics within those categories. So for example, the adulting group in one class is putting together an online cookbook for dorm rooms. So how can you eat healthy and make your own food if you don't feel like or don't want to go to the cafeteria, instead of just eating, things that are bad for you. They're making an online cookbook for that. And so I feel like the second semester, what I did was I dug in and I asked the kids at college, I asked them, what are some topics that you wish that you had known when you were in high school? And so that's how I developed that list. So I feel like that's pretty across the board. I think this summer I'll probably sit back and look at the scope of the course and what we were able to accomplish and say to myself, well, is there some area that I wish that we had covered or gone over? I mean, we have a financial literacy group, so there's a group that's talking about budgeting and how do you get a loan and what about taxes. So I feel like it's spread out pretty thoroughly.
Do you think in the future there should be any classes that focus on the certain topics that we talk about, like maybe a student activism class or a mental health class?
Maybe. I think that maybe that might be too narrow of a topic for an entire course, for a whole year. But I do think that one of the things that you see in media a lot, and it has been in the back of my mind throughout the structuring of this course, is, you know, sometimes I'll see in memes or something online, oh, why did I learn this weird theory in science or this obscure formula in math, but I don't know how to get a loan for a mortgage, or I don't know how to balance my checkbook. Like, why are those the things that are taught in school instead of these other things? And it's meant to be funny, but in some ways I've been trying in class when I can to kind of say, all right, well, let's research those things then. Let's not leave high school if we don't know how to, you know, make a budget or do those sort of life lesson things. Yeah.
Now, do you feel classes with this type of format should be required everywhere?
I don't know about required. I think they should be offered in a lot of places, because I feel like a student-driven course like this, where you're researching on topics that are relevant to you and of interest to you, should be part of any education. I don't think that it's fair for a bunch of people who write textbooks or create curriculum programs to be the only ones that decide what happens in a classroom. And teachers, of course, make those decisions all the time with their lesson plans, but we're still driven by state objectives and all those other aspects. And in a class like this, the objectives are pretty open and based on research. So I think that, especially toward the end of a student's high school education, it's time for them to know and investigate things that are relevant and interesting to them.
Now, this class sort of reminds me of, I believe it was Ralph Waldo Emerson. He wrote an essay on education, and he talked about trying to find a balance between a mother's touch and allowing students to flow with their creativity and speak whenever they have a thought or an idea, and then also sort of a sergeant-like teaching where you're very firm.
Yeah.
And this class, nothing's perfect, but I feel like this class is as close as it gets to a perfect balance between that, because you have firm deadlines. You have you're very firm about when things need to be turned in, but also how they're set up. Like, right. You're not gonna see like a sloppy assignment, a sloppy slideshow.
Well, not for a good grade, we're not.
Yeah. So there's that room for freedom and creativity from the student's perspective, but there's also that firmness.
Right.
And I think it creates a near perfect balance of what Emerson talked about.
I think that's true, and I appreciate you saying that, because I think that when students are maturing and getting ready to go to their next level, where we expect them to be adults and conduct themselves that way, then we need to relinquish some of the control that happens as an instructor and turn into more guides. I mean, the ultimate goal of education is to have autonomous people in the world who can make their own decisions and conduct their own lives. So part of education should be preparing them for that aspect, not just learning facts or even in my own subject area, reading Shakespeare plays. It's good to know, and of course it's important as a part of a basic education, but also we have to know how to look into our own future and prepare for it. So I feel like it is a balance between those two things. I would prefer if I didn't have to do as much of the sergeant stuff. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it would be nice if we just had an environment where the students were conducting inquiry and research because they were just motivated to do that, and then they were producing top quality videos and essays and PowerPoints and so on that depicted their learning. But I think that ultimately I have to give a grade for the class because it needs to be on a transcript. And so there has to be some requirements for those things, and the people who don't meet those requirements because of deadlines or expectations, those grades shouldn't be as high as the other grades. So I don't know if you remember earlier in the first semester, I structured some of the things that we were doing so that you could make your own grades on things.
Yes, we had to do it on the test prep, the scholarship evidence,
right,
and our independent research evidence also, that we're still working on them.
Right, so like ideally, you wouldn't need me to grade anything, but in reality, I need to give you a grade because GPAs and ranks and transcripts and report cards and all that stuff. So the ideal would be I don't need to be a sergeant at all, and it can just be I'm guiding you and helping you develop your own ideas about what you're researching. But the reality is that we're in a school and we're taking a class, and the other reality that we don't talk about a whole lot is that the only currency really to motivate us, well, the major currency is grades and GPAs and points and all that stuff. So the sergeant part comes from that reality. I wish I didn't have to do that part. I wish that we could just have a classroom where at the end I can just give a grade, but they want a progress report grade. They want a report card from the first 6 weeks, and this, everybody wants to know how they're doing, so.
A funny thing about you allowing us to grade ourselves was I would always get nervous when I had to input my grades because I felt like all hundreds was kind of pushing it. So
yeah.
I'd put like a couple, like 1 and 2 hundreds and then like a 95.
Right.
Just to say I'm not perfect. And I remember Sylvester, another student, he would tell me that he put like a 90 or a 95.
Right.
Just so he wouldn't feel like he was pushing it as well. Well,
I don't know about pushing it, but the idea that there's always room for improvement. Yeah. And there were people who put all hundreds. And I mean, I went through and you guys suggested it was more of a suggestion situation. And then if I looked at your evidence that you submitted, like your screenshots of your applications or what have you, and it seemed like those grades were in line, then I just went ahead and put in those grades. But then other people were, like you said, pushing it a little bit. Like I would look and see that things weren't thoroughly done, or and so that can't be 100. But it's just, I feel like it depends on your own mindset of your own work. If you feel like you're a work in progress, which we all kind of are, then you're not going to give yourself 100 in general, because you're always thinking, I always could have done better, I could have learned more, I could have expanded something. And it was kind of interesting from my perspective to see who was just I get all hundreds, and which people were kind of like, well, I'm a work in progress, so I'm just going to give myself a 95, But yeah, that was an interesting experiment.
Speaking of your perspective, because you've been teaching this sort of new class, you have a sort of unique perspective rather than a teacher who would just give a whole bunch of assignments and then not let the students talk at all, just teach and that's it. You allow us, like I said, to have more freedom in our research. Mm-hmm. So you get to see what the students are interested in, what they want to research themselves, how much work they put into the research and all that.
Right.
And you sort of get this new perspective on your students in high school, and high school students in general. So what's changed in your perspective, if anything?
I think that my perspective hasn't changed on my students that much, because I think I'm pretty observant. Even in the more traditional classes, I'm pretty observant with my students. But I think as a society, we need to understand that students have a rich, deep inquiry, and in general, there's a sort of development that they understand, but also I feel like given the opportunity, students will take the opportunity to really enrich themselves. And I guess I thought that I might have to push people a little bit more than I do. Because they're choosing their own topics, the students are already motivated to investigate their topics. And I think that the world out there kind of needs to know that. We see in the news a lot of times, there are reports and things like that that sort of show the downside of young people today, the problems that they get into, or what they can't do, or how they aren't doing, or whatever. And I think that it's important to remember that we need to give opportunities for students to flourish and to investigate things that they're interested in. Maybe they're not being as successful as they could be because we're forcing them to do things in a way that doesn't speak to them. So in this class, I ask you not just what do you want to study, but how do you want to represent what you learned from that inquiry. And so you get that choice. And I don't think you're used to that choice. You know, it's sort of like this, I mean, even in my own English 4 class, what I want is I want this 3-page paper. Yeah. And that's what we do. We don't say, well, or you could, you know, make a podcast, or you could make an infographic, or, you know, like, that's not usually an option. Yeah. So I think that one of the things that I think needs to be projected from a class like this is the idea that students have more depth of ideas than sometimes we give them credit for.
Now, how would you feel if the College Board, instead of having AP exams on paper, they said, why don't you make a podcast or an infographic or a slideshow on everything you've learned?
Well, it doesn't measure what they want to measure. You know, like, that's the thing. I think that we should have both. I feel like there should be opportunities for students to do both. There should be an opportunity for you to take a rigorous academic exam that proves that you're able to analyze literature or do calculus or, you know, understand history at a certain level. I think, like, that's a separate skill, and it's no less important than any other skill. It's valuable that you can show that you're able to do that on a level on par with other students in the country or the world. But then I also think that there should be a component to education that highlights student choice and it has expectations of, you know, excellent results and excellent outcomes, even given student choice. So, and has that rigor of expectation, but has the element of student-directed work. So I feel like they're two separate things and that you should have the opportunity to pursue both or one or the other as a student. You should have more options, basically, is what I'm saying, I think.
Now, what have you learned from this class and the research that has resulted in it?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think that individual topics, some students have chosen things that I didn't even know anything about. And that I don't have to know about it because the student's doing the research. So what I end up learning from is the end result, the video that they produce, the presentation that they do, the slideshow that they create. So yeah, I've learned a lot. Some students have done projects on, like, the pathway to a certain career that I didn't know because I took my own pathway to my own career. So I don't know what it takes to be an astrophysicist, but somebody researched that, so now I know. And so that was, you know, that sort of thing is interesting and expands my own knowledge of the world and I guess what my students might pursue when they're done. So, you know, the various topics are endless, and I think that's exciting to me because you never know what the next proposal is going to present. Yeah. And you never know what the next project is going to teach you. So there are a lot of things that students have worked on that have actually informed me. But it's not about informing me only, it's about informing, you know, like, the world at large. So that's why we're doing the website, and that's why we're doing the YouTube channel and this podcast.
And I think that's another unique aspect about this class. When the teacher grades the assignments, she or he is also learning from what the students turn into them.
Yeah.
In regular classes, maybe in English 4, if you give them a Hamlet test, you're not going to learn anything from the Hamlet test because you've already read it.
Right.
But if I give you a blog on the Peace Corps, maybe you didn't know that much about the Peace Corps.
Right.
Now you're learning as well.
And that sort of thing keeps you motivated as a teacher, right? Like, I know that this podcast is geared toward other students, but just from a teacher perspective, you know, if you've been teaching the same stuff for a really long time, it is hard to be innovative and find a new facet to what you're teaching. So in a class like this, everything's always new because every time there's a new proposal, a new project, there's the potential to learn something new.
Now, have the results from this year made you excited to carry it on next year?
For sure. I have not been shy about telling the students that this is a little bit of a guinea pig year. I had a concept that I presented, and I knew kind of some of the components that I wanted to enact in this class, and I think that I've been successful in doing that. But there's some things that I want to refine for next year. There are some things that I started late with this group that I didn't realize until later on in the year would be good to do, that I'm going to start from the very beginning next year. So all that, I mean, like, I think all good educators sit down, even with courses that they've taught multiple times, and you evaluate. And you ask yourself, well, what worked, what didn't, what do I want to carry over into future incarnations of this class, and what don't I want to carry over? So, like, I think that probably at the end of this semester, I might ask for feedback from the students about the class a little bit, more than I might in a more traditional class. And just take all those things into consideration as I plan for next year.
Well, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast, Ms. Ramos.
My pleasure.